So you can just use.
Okay, so we're just going to do a little bit of an intro to desalinization, which was kind of covered earlier in this class, but you know. I'm Amanda, that's Stephen, and this is Elsie. So if you'll just do that next. Okay. And then again, just a little bit of background on the subject. Water is a huge abundant resource that we have. 97% of it is salt water, which we cannot drink. But there are millions of people that need these basic resources that don't have access to it. So if we could find a way to use this really abundant source of salt water to give them that fresh water, that would be a huge help for all these people.
And I just thought of something as well. If you look at Mars, for instance, it also has a lot of drying water for desalination because you don't want to really take water up to Mars. It's same things like in Europe and so on. So there are lots of very interesting applications.
Cool. Yeah, and then as we were doing some further research, we found that there's kind of two different main systems: a direct system, which directly uses the solar rays to usually heat up that water to then get into a water vapor to then be collected as fresh water, and then an indirect system, which is usually a solar panel or some other form of collecting that solar energy and then using that collection to fuel whatever process is needed. So one example of a direct system that we have found is the Aquamate solar still. And then this one is extremely portable. It's usually bought by people on boats that you can just fill that with seawater, put it out to the sea, and then the solar rays are collected inside. The salt water is then, vaporized through the entire day. It's then collected on that membrane that you can see right there. That is then, filed into a little container that you can kind of see floating right there. But it does only do about a 1 liter of water in a whole day. Next, thank you. So the advantages of the Aquamate is that it is extremely portable. It is just, you blow into it and it blows up into this. So it gets really compact, which is great for sailors and that kind of stuff. Or hiking if you're going to go up to a lake that isn't, super clean. But the disadvantages of that is that it is completely dictated by how much sun is around. So the weather is a huge effect. If you do get a tear in any of these kind of parts, it's not going to really work. You can't contain that heat and help it vaporize that water. If you have a tear in one of those holes, or you won't collect the water properly, or that salt water will get mixed into your fresh water. Yeah. And then another system that was found that I think is really interesting is, I'm probably going to say this completely incorrectly, so bear with me, is the Eldeo Mestico. This was designed by an Italian designer. It basically works as like an upside down coffee maker, where you put all of that salt water into the top chamber and screw that lid tight so that it's a closed system. And then that the metal part that you put the water in is black, so it collects that heat, and then the water vaporizes, which increases the pressure inside the container, which makes that water vapor get forced down so that it can then collect on the inside of that bottom portion that you see, that then allows them to remove that fresh water. This one does produce a bit more, of about 5 liters a day. Yeah.
What's that part that separates the salt water from the other line chamber? Is that a filter?
So, sorry.
What is that?
The little middle tube right here.
Yes.
Oh.
This, yeah?
Yeah. So they've got like a ceramic pot that's holding this all together. And there's so right here is the metal boiling chamber basically. Mm-hmm. And there's this little tube that.
So I see. What's that thing that separates the top chamber from the bottom chamber?
Right here?
Yes.
So there's not really anything. So there's the pot right here, which is that metal. which sits on top of this ceramic kind of pot. Yes. So yeah, the only thing connecting is this tube, really. Yeah. Was that made that any clearer?
Yes, and you have to somehow prevent the salt water from going through the tube, which I don't really understand.
Yeah, so you don't fill up to past that point.
So
Yeah.
There's like a air pocket or something. Right?
Yes. Yeah. You won't fill this completely all the way to the top. Yeah.
What does it look kind of strange at the bottom? What's it stuff at the bottom?
Right here?
Yeah.
Okay, so the steam will, happen here, and then this increase in pressure forces the steam down, which is like a valve, and it prevents it from going back in. Then there is this metal portion here that the steam then collects onto and condenses down into this bowl, which is a ceramic bowl that they've designed so that you can pull it out and then just carry on top of your head. Yeah. So the advantages of this one is, again, all you need is the sun's rays. It's made from relatively cheap and accessible materials. They can just give the design to the people in the village and they can make the ceramic pot. And then I'm thinking that there's also can do something with the metal pot, but I'm not 100% on that, to be honest. But the disadvantages is that it is a relatively small yield compared to other methods that we will talk about later. So relatively small yield. It does take all day to collect all of this, and it is relatively small yield, so it's about one family's worth. So if you need to supply a whole village, you do need a large area of all of these to actually get enough.
Okay, so let's look at some indirect systems now, unlike the past ones we just looked at. So these guys are going to collect solar energy, usually through solar panels, to then power a secondary process that desalinates the water. First one I took a look at was reverse osmosis. Now I know Rajesh kind of went pretty in depth on this on the first one, but just brief overview. If you have pure water on one side, really concentrated salty water on the other, and a membrane in between, the second law of thermodynamics, it's going to equalize. And so you're going to end up with a lot more on the concentrated side. That's osmosis. Reverse osmosis is when you apply pressure to that concentrated side. It's going to force water through the membrane, but keep all the salts and microorganisms on the other side of the membrane. So you end up with pure water. Is one of the most prevalent indirect systems currently employed. As we'll see a bit later in the presentation, RO accounts for about half of global desalination right now. And again, multiple stages of this can be implemented. So you can pass it through. The reject water from the first system could be pumped into another one, or vice versa, to get really pure water.
So here it says steam. So is it
reject? Oh, reject stream.
Oh, stream.
There's a tiny little R in there. Yeah. I was like, wait, did I get the wrong? No, we're good. Okay, so some advantages of reverse osmosis is that it's highly effective at removing contaminants. In a well-built system, usually utilizing multiple stages, you can get up to 99% of the dissolved salts out of the water. And then in addition to just salts, the semi-permeable membrane that's used will filter out organic compounds and microorganisms as well. So it'll typically taste good, which is good for us. Now, some disadvantages of reverse osmosis is that the pressure you need to overcome the natural osmotic pressure is really, really high. This can pose an issue in terms of scaling this process down when you want to use solar energy, because you would need to implement a large farm of solar panels to get enough pressure. Another thing, again, going to kind of cost effectiveness, is that the membrane will get a lot of buildup on it over time, so you have to replace those. And it can also be a notoriously wasteful method. One article I was looking at, a reverse osmosis plant outside of the city in India rejected about 70% of the input of the feed water. So you're only getting about 30% product from that input.
Now, why was that?
So after the feed water has been forced through the semi-permeable membrane, the super concentrated solution on the other side, yeah, that's reject. And so if you wanted to do another pass with that, you need way more pressure, and it just wasn't cost effective.
By the way, the comment about taste, you mentioned the taste. Actually, I had some of this water. It can taste not so good.
Not okay.
So that could be a problem.
Yeah. Okay. We'll keep that in mind. Okay. And then the other indirect system I want to talk about is electrodialysis reversal. This one I thought was really cool with my physics background. So it's another membrane, or it's another desalination process that uses membranes, but instead of forcing the water directly through the membrane, you're instead pumping the water up. So here, I'll just use the mouse. So you're pumping the water up like this. And we all know that when salts are in water, they're going to dissolve into the positive cations and the negative anions. So what this guy does is, using the solar energy we collected in that first system, it applies a voltage on either side of this water collection tank with a negative anode and a positive anode and a negative cathode, that doesn't matter, on either side. So then you're pumping the water up through, and these little guys right here we see in green and red are cation and anion selective membranes. So those guys will, like a cation selective membrane will only let cations pass through. It'll block anions, and the same goes in reverse for AMs. And so when you stack these up alternatively with a little water cell in between, you're going to end up with alternating. This is supposed to be a GIF that should be moving and looking cool, but it isn't. You'll end up with alternating tubes of really concentrated water with ions on either side of the membrane, and then diluted potable solution on the other, potable water on the other side that gets pumped out. But in order for this to be effective, you do have to align a lot of cell pairs, which is also known as a stack. Some commercial grade ones will use hundreds of stacks. And then another cool thing, the reversal in EDR stands for intermittently reversing the polarity of the applied voltage. When that happens, the water is going to flush through the other way, and then you'll kind of clean the membranes out. So again, so some advantages: the feed water isn't being forced through a membrane like reverse osmosis, so the required energy and is much lower, so you can scale it down. And then, as I just mentioned, that reversal part can be thought of as kind of a self-cleaning process, so you don't have to replace the membranes as much. Disadvantages: it doesn't remove microorganisms and organic compounds. You're only going to filter out those salty ions. So article I was looking at, I forget her name, from MIT's Gear Lab, utilized UV light as a post-treatment to get rid of those organic compounds in there. And then also, when the feed water passes a certain threshold of salinity, you're going to have to recycle the water so much that it's not going to be cost effective. Yeah.
So the next indirect system we looked at was a multi-stage flash distillation process, where usually you take water from the ocean, and you have this little diagram is going to show what I'm seeing, but you send it through. Oh yeah, great. Okay, so you take water from the ocean and you send it through pipes through the vapor that you're going to create later to preheat the seawater, so you don't, and then it goes to a brine heater, which puts extra energy in to heat the seawater up, and then it goes to several tanks, each with decreasing pressure as you get to later tanks that are close to a vacuum, so the seawater evaporates at a lower temperature. And then it comes up here and condenses and collects into a tray, and then it produces fresh water. Multiple stages allow more fresh water to be collected as you go through the process. And then after the last stage, the seawater discharges usually back into the ocean. And then another two other things that are similar to the last one are multi-effect distillation and mechanical vapor compression. So multi-effect distillation is really similar to multi-stage flash distillation in that you go through multiple stages and you are evaporating the seawater in a vacuum. But instead, salt water is sprayed over horizontal tube bundles that are carrying steam that then evaporate the salt water, which is then collected similarly to the last system. And then, excuse me?
There are no filters.
No filters. It's just all evaporation in these ones. And then mechanical vapor compression is just used to increase the energy efficiency of other systems. You can see it up here by mechanically compressing the vapor to evaporate the seawater. Some advantages of these systems are the plants are really reliable and durable, and they require little maintenance and they can last a long time. They also allow for the possibility of cogeneration. So if you put them in tandem with a power plant, you can use the reject heat from the power plant to heat the seawater. They also produce huge amounts of fresh water. So commercial plants have capacities ranging from 4,000 to 30,000 cubic meters per day. So they're much bigger than the last systems. And then you don't have to pre-treat the seawater very much before you put it into the system. So some disadvantages of it, it can have a really significant environmental impact when you pump the brine back into the ocean. Because it's so concentrated, it can affect the marine life. And also the temperature could affect it if you don't do something to the brine before you pump it back into the ocean. A lot of these plants already in use are not often using energy produced by solar or wind. So right now they're not very renewable. So that's something that could be improved upon. And I was finding that the freshwater produced doesn't taste very good. So the World Health Organization recommended that you blend it with other water before it's consumed by people. This is a little pie chart showing like the distribution of different desalination methods. So reverse osmosis is the most prevalent with being almost half. And then the multi-stage flash distillation is the next highest. And then the smallest are the other two I talked about, and then all other forms. And then a couple cool things that we saw for current innovations in desalination. One of them was a modified solar still, where they put a cylinder in the solar still and slowly rotated it so that it created a film of water on the top of the cylinder, which evaporated much faster. And it was shown to increase the production of a solar still by almost 400%. So it was really awesome. And then another one we found was some concentrated solar power produced by heliostats aimed at transparent domes, just to increase the temperature in the domes and increase evaporation within the domes. Okay.
And the domes, there is
the domes have big metal bowls in the bottom of them that have salt water, and then it collects on the top of the dome.
That's very good. We're running a little long, so we should have a next team.
Okay.
Thank you. By the way, I posted a link today on the lab webpage. Take a look. It's the Solar Desalination Prize. So for those of you who are working on water, there's a lot of resources. Take a look at it. The Department of Energy